Now, I just watched a video of a group of guys on TikTok taking regular beef, grinding it up, and then putting it back together and forming it into like a fake Wagyu beef. You know, that super marbly fat steak. But I was wondering if we can use a similar technique to create a plant-based steak. So today I put together some ideas, just from some things that I've done in the past, some things like a technique that I just came up with when I made the hot dogs. So let me see if I can make the world's first really good plant-based steak without using gluten. I think I could do it. No gluten. Let's get moving. Okay, so in a small bowl, first ingredient, we're gonna do beet powder. Beet powder is gonna help with some flavor, also a lot of color. We need about 4 grams of beet powder, 2 grams of cocoa powder, 1 gram of garlic powder, 4 grams of yeast extract. I'm using Marmite. Now this stuff is sticky and hard to work with, but man, does it give it a meaty flavor, very meaty flavor. 1 gram of blackstrap molasses. This is gonna give it an irony taste. You know, let's just do 2 grams. 4 grams mushroom extract. So this is our dry ingredients. Now let's add our wet. I know the yeast extract wasn't really dry, but we're gonna do 250 milliliters of water, 15 milliliters of soy sauce, 2 milliliters liquid smoke, and 8 milliliters of vinegar, white vinegar. So this is our liquid and dry. This should be our flavor. Let's just whisk this together and make sure all of the clumps and everything are out. We want this to be really nice and whisked up. We're gonna set these guys aside. All of those seasonings and everything are gonna kind of mingle up for just a few moments. So we're gonna try to do about a pound so that way we can get about 2 or 3 steaks out of it. 100 grams of textured vegetable protein. Then I'm gonna add about 50 grams of pea protein. So we're actually going with 40 grams here. That's all I had left. Thought I had a lot more. Now this is a binder, but I wanted to get it in at this point. We're gonna be using some methylcellulose high viscosity, methylcellulose HV. And it works to bind ingredients, but it also does a really cool trick that when you heat it up, it actually gets stiffer. So it actually toughens up. We're gonna be using 6 grams of it. I'm just gonna whisk that up to get the protein, the methylcellulose, kind of everything mixed in with this TVP. It's an even mixture, making a mess everywhere, like I always do. Now at this point, we're just gonna add our liquid ingredients. We're just gonna give this another whisk. And then let's just make sure that this is nice and combined and should be a fairly wet mixture. Also, I wanted to add that if you taste this wet mixture here, should have kind of like a very beef broth type of taste, which it really does. Now I'm just gonna switch over to a spatula and make sure everything's off the sides. And it's in one nice, because as soon as I started mixing this with a spatula, I started getting clumps of dry powder. So at this point, this mixture is looking great. We're gonna let this sit aside while we do the next step. We want this to sit for at least 20, 30 minutes because we want that TVP to really hydrate up, to soak all that liquid in. We might have to add a little bit more liquid to this, but we'll find out. We're gonna kind of morph this recipe as we go. So for the next part, we're gonna make the fat. This is gonna be the marbling fat. Now this is a very similar fat that I've made in other burger videos. I've used this fat in a lot of recipes. I'm gonna leave links for everything down below, but we're gonna remake the fat today. Now for this very specific fat, it's gonna be a little bit different because we're making a steak. And the other thing is here is because of the amounts of ingredients and because of the way blenders work and everything, we're actually gonna be making about 4 times the amount of fat that we need. We could store that and use it later for other recipes, burger recipes, things like that. So don't get freaked out by the amounts of oil that's going into this. You're gonna be cutting it by at least a third or at least a quarter. So starting off, we're gonna do 100 milliliters of water. And before we get this all started, I'm gonna measure out 300 grams of coconut oil. Now this is refined. You wanna use the refined coconut oil. If you don't use refined coconut oil, then you're gonna get something that tastes very coconutty. So we're gonna get the blender going on a low speed with just the water in it. I'm gonna drop in 2 grams of methylcellulose, which you'll see gel up. It'll turn into like a gum almost. Not as gummy as xanthan gum, but more like a slime. So once we've gotten that, I know it doesn't sound appetizing, but it works. So once we got that gum going, now we're gonna slowly pour in our coconut oil, and this will start to emulsify and get into almost like a mayo type of consistency. And now quickly, while this is still spinning, we're gonna do 1 gram of kappa carrageenan. It's gonna make it so our marbling fat actually gets firm, like a steak would be. So that looks pretty good, and almost, like I said, almost mayo-like consistency. I mean, look at this. Look at that, it's wonderful. Now we're gonna set this mixture to the side, and now we're gonna start working on the texture of this steak, putting this all together. Now this stuff is thick. It's almost like the consistency of like a Play-Doh. We don't want that. We want this to get thin. We want to thin this out just a little bit more. So I'm actually going to run it through just a small blend, like a small food processor. You know what? I wonder if I could just do the whole thing. I don't think it'll be too much. It might actually work out better. It looks like the bottom is really kind of like really blended in there, but the stuff on top just isn't getting through. So let's push this down in. I might have overfilled it. It might have been too much, but it's okay. We're just gonna keep working. And we definitely don't wanna like get it to where it's just a paste. We still want it to be have a little bit of the textured protein left. Let me empty this whole thing out and just see where we're at this point. Oh, this is a tough block. So yeah, this stuff on the bottom here looks a lot more like what I'm going for. Really good, thinner kind of, not the big, large chunks that you would get with TVP. Now at this point we have this mixture, we got half the mixture, half this mixture. I'm gonna add about 6 grams of kappa carrageenan to the meat. It's gonna help kind of firm it up and make it more like one thing. Now I know I might get a lot of questions about not using agar-agar, but agar-agar actually melts with heat. So that's gonna do the opposite of what we want. We don't want this to firm with heat. So let's add that kappa carrageenan in there. And again, I don't know if this is gonna work. I just dreamt this up and I just kind of can imagine how this might actually work. Okay, so now that we have the fat and we have the protein, I thought long and hard, how the heck are we gonna get the texture of this? How are we gonna make a steak? Now there's some really cool companies overseas that are building like 3D printed steaks. And essentially all they're doing is they're using a printer like with a little nozzle and they're printing the fibers and they're printing those fibers along with something I'm imagining is very similar to what I made here. But then they're also coming along and they're printing in that fat. They're printing in those, that marbling of the steak. And I was trying to think of how we could do this without this $1 million of technology to print. And I thought of the one thing that I have, a potato ricer. I think with all of these little holes, we should be able to print out some texture. Let's see if this works. This is all an idea. So I wanna make a log. We're gonna do the steak sideways so that when we cook it, we could slice it down to have a steak. So I'm going to take some plastic wrap. That's gonna be what holds this together. Oh God, I hate plastic. I just can't stand using plastic wrap for multiple reasons. And like these cutters never actually cut. You end up just like ripping it. Ugh, ugh. Now for the fat, I'm not gonna use the potato ricer. I'm actually gonna use a baggie. We're gonna put the fat into the baggie and then we're gonna snip off the corner here. Boop. Okay, let's start. Let's get this going through the potato ricer and see if we can get some texture going. Now there's a little bit of fat on this, but you know what? I don't care. It'll be good to add in some of that, those grains of like fat. Now if our steaks are gonna be about 1 inch thick, we want this to be about 4 inches. We've went to about 5, but that's okay because we're gonna kind of compress this together. And now we're just gonna kind of pipe in some fat lines here. I just want them, I don't want them to be very even, so we're just gonna kind of go just a few lines. And just remember on the next layer when you do this, where your fat lines are at. So when we cut this, this is gonna be part of the grain. Now some of these we can just kind of pipe down into the middle, get some fat worked in there throughout. We can even do a fat line on the outside here. This looks weird now, but I think it's gonna come together. I truly believe that. But I'm just gonna bring up the sides and I'm gonna roll this up and over. Now this is the point to where once we get to this point, we wanna make it like a log and press in. Now I'm gonna get a water bath ready. We're just gonna get that water up to boiling. We're gonna throw this in a baggie, get it real nice and air sealed. Then we should be able to really, only a few more steps after this to just have a nice steak. And I think these are gonna be pretty awesome, like really awesome. Okay, so this guy has been sitting in some simmering water for about 30 minutes. I'm gonna fill this with some ice cold water. I'm gonna throw a bunch of ice in here and some ice water, and we're just gonna quickly take this out of that hot water and submerge it to cool it down. We're gonna throw it in the freezer for like 20, 30 minutes just to give it a nice chill. Okay, so this has been in the freezer for a few hours, just kind of firming it up. It's pretty solid. I think it feels pretty good, a heck of a lot better than where it was at. I'm also really hoping, I'm also really thinking that we might have that steak texture. So let's take this end off here, not bad. It definitely doesn't look like meatloaf, which is good. We didn't get a lot of marbling like what I wanted to, nearly as much as I thought it would. Before we cook them, I'm just gonna do some salt and pepper on both sides, and that's all we're gonna really add to these steaks. So to cook these guys, I just have a skillet with some olive oil in it. I'm just gonna throw a pinch of vegan butter along with that olive oil. It's just for a bit of flavoring. We're gonna allow this to get pretty hot, and we're gonna put these guys in and just cook them for just a few minutes on each side. Now I just happen to have a little sprig of thyme. I'm gonna drop that in there just to kind of give these a little bit of herbal fragrance. I mean, they just look absolutely wonderful. Look at that friggin' steak. I mean, that's unbelievable. Jeez, oh, just look at that. I mean, that is just unbelievable. Still came out just a bit too meatloafy, more than what I wanted. But, man, the taste just nails it. I think if I were to do it again, if I were to do this again, I would probably look closer at maybe blending it a little bit more liquid, and actually do more of the kappa carrageenan. I think more kappa carrageenan would give you a tighter texture and maybe keep like the fibers going a little bit more. It is meaty and it has a really good bite. I mean, it has the same density level of steak. So I think we're on the right path. I think we are on the right path to the perfect vegan steak. Let's keep trying it out.